Welcome to Concordance and Coffee. I'm your host, Dewan Coleon. And what we're going to do is break down humble in the Hebrew and the Greek so you can understand it in English. So, the Hebrew word that we're talking about today is humble thee. And this understanding of humility, being humble, is what leads you to exaltation. Because if you just do a search of the word elevate or elevation from an English perspective, that word doesn't show up in the Hebrew, because I was doing my study and I didn't see elevate or elevation. But what God was showing me is that the path, the process is you must be humble in order to be to a place of elevation, which is the Hebrew word exalt. So we're going to get into that and understand humbling. We do, in American context, we don't want to be humble. We don't want to be humiliated or go through a process of being down or losing it all or being at the bottom, putting in the pit. Talk about Joseph as an example. He was humbled. He was stripped of his coat, of his fashion, of who he was or projected, identified as externally. He was humbled, put in prison, put in a pit, only to go through a process that eventually exalted him, got him to a position in a place that he could never get to as a Hebrew. A Hebrew can't be the second in charge of Egypt in the natural. It's not possible, because Hebrews were slaves. But because he went through the humbling process that God took him through, even though it looked crazy to everyone else, he went through the process. And then Joseph was elevated, exalted to a position that you can't get to. Only God can do it. Look at Moses. Moses is a perfect example of the balance. He was known, Numbers 12:3, it says Moses was very humble, the most humble man on the face of the earth because of his circumstance. Moses went from the top, being one of the sons that could inherit the rulership of Egypt. He went from that high all the way to being cast out, being stripped of everything and thrown out literally in the desert. He didn't have any titles, any money. He didn't have anything but the staff that God would use in his exaltation process. That's all Moses had. And he went through a whole 40-year humbling process. And only then, at the opportune appointed time, Moses was elevated. So that's what happens. This is the process. If God is taking you through a humbling process, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. It's going to expose who you are, what's in you, what your capacity is. But at the same time, if you go through the process, if you get on the potter's wheel, if you allow God to curate you, he can then present you as a vessel of gold, a vessel of honor that can be exalted before the world to do his purposes. So let's look at humble thee. That word in the Hebrew is Anna. And God uses Anna as a tool to humble people. So don't take it personal when people are used by God to try to disrespect, humiliate, bring you down, talk about you, betray you. That's what Anna does, literally. That's what the Hebrew word is. Humble thee, Anna. That's what it is. Strong's H6031. It means to put down, become low, depressed, downcast, be afflicted, to stoop low. You're willing to stoop low and do all manners of evil. But God will use that. Joseph was humiliated. They lied on Joseph. Understand, they lied on him. They created all these false narratives. They separated him from his family. They threw him in a pit. But God used that humble situation, circumstance as a way to curate him, to get him to the elevation that he had showed him. God had already showed Joseph that he was going to be elevated above all his brothers, above his family, above all these people that were trying to pull him down and humble and depress him. So the mishandling of you, that word also means humble thee, Anna, means mishandling. They're going to mishandle, they're going to afflict, they're going to try to humble you in their own way. But understand, God is above everything. God is in anything, and he allows these things to happen for your good, for your point of purpose. Growing in the affliction. See, a part of the humble thee, it's a process. You prayed and asked to be exalted. The prophecies and the prophets all told you years ago, you're going to be exalted, just like Moses. But you got to go through that process. If you're not willing to go through the process, you're not going to get to the exaltation that God has for you. That's why a lot of people would just look at you, they'll watch, they'll try to discourage, they'll lurk, but they're not going to go through no process. They just think they can give some offerings, run some numbers, go to the right church service, and God's going to elevate them. God's going to exalt them. That's not how it works. It never works that way. You can manufacture and conjure up or manifest your own little exaltation, but understood the conjure up magic manifestation, because Pharaoh and the Egyptians used manifestation, and they were able to manifest their own little miracles. But it got to a point to where they couldn't compete with God. They couldn't compete with Moses, because there's a difference. It's levels to it. There's a difference between what you manifest and what God does when he takes a person through a process and then exalts them. So the suffering gets you to a better place and perspective to know God. Deuteronomy 8:3, and says he humbled you, suffered you to be hungry, in order to feed you with something supernatural, which was the manna. He fed them. Manna was not something that was normal. God was feeding them while they were struggling, while they were wandering in the wilderness. He was providing for them every day. They couldn't keep manna. They couldn't keep it overnight because God designed it. You could only use it for that day, because you needed to learn a process of trusting God every day. You didn't have overflow. I know exactly what that is like, having to trust God every day, having to deal with homelessness, and you only got $10 in the bank for today, and not knowing what you're going to eat or do tomorrow, and God is not letting you worry about tomorrow because today has enough issues itself. And then every day God provides manna. God provides a way out. God provides someone to send you some money, and you eat that day, or you get resources that day. I know what that is. And this is the process God was but he was taking his people through so that they could appreciate when they got to the promised land. You have to go through the humbling, suffering, in order to also break generational curses.